Hello, listeners and viewers, potentially, because we're back for another Arcade Attack podcast. It's Adrian here, and I've got another super guest on the show. A few months ago, we had Michael Lathan on. We've had him twice, actually, a good friend of the show. And actually, I'd class him as a friend now, which is, I can't believe I'm saying that, believe it or not. And he introduced one of his friends to the show, Erik Wahlberg, and another amazing Sega legend. He's worked on some amazing games, and it is a real honor, real pleasure to get you on the show. So, Erik, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Adrian. I mean, like I said, I'm honored. I think you've interviewed some amazing people already, and just to be on your podcast and be able to share some stories, I think will be really exciting. So, thank you back.
No, honestly, the pleasure is all ours, and we are huge Sega fans. You know, for many of us on Arcade Attack, it's probably our favourite company growing up. So just getting the chance to speak to another person, I think you said, before, foot on the ground kind of guy, really amongst the thick of it during the 90s of the Sega sort of golden era. So thank you. Before we talk about Sega, and that'll take the bulk of our interview, I'm pretty sure. I'd love to sort of talk to you about your kind of earliest memories about gaming growing up, and how did you get the passion, and have you got like a favorite game sort of in those early days?
Sure, yeah. So my first memory is very clear. I was 9 years old, and Pong came out for the home system, right? And it was literally just Pong. I mean, this is, I think, 1976 or something. And my dad bought it for himself, and he let me play it, obviously. And of course, being a 9-year-old, having time with a Pong machine, I played it constantly, right? And so he had his friends come over for a big party, a bunch of adults, and I'm the one 9-year-old walking around, messing things up. And they started playing Pong against each other. And then they said, hey, let Erik play, right? And so I went in there and I just destroyed everybody. And what was funny was I remember one of the people, he goes to my dad, isn't it a little bit late? Shouldn't you be going to bed? And I literally was sent to bed because I was kicking all our ass in Pong. So so that was fun. It was, and then, I played so many systems for so many years. Next was like the Breakout console machine that had several games on it, and then ones had blackjack and other ones. So I learned how to play some poker games at a very young age playing those. And then I can truncate some of the stuff and elongate some of the stuff. So in general, though, I played the Intellivision quite a bit. That was probably my system. Obviously, I played the Atari as well.
Oh yeah.
But other memories. So aside from just endless hours of playing games like like the Dungeons and Dragons, Treasure of Tarmin on the Intellivision, or just all these random games I just had a great time with, was I remember I would go to the 7-Eleven and I started playing arcade machines quite a bit, probably around the age of 11 maybe. And I mean, that was the golden era of arcade games, like, because there was no systems that were even close. And so played everything from Double Dragon to Karate Champ. And actually the Star Wars arcade game, the vector graphics game with the voiceover. Oh, I was just in love with that game. And I got good enough where I played the hardest mode and I could beat it on a quarter or 50 cents or whatever it was back then. And then also playing at a nearby 7-Eleven before I was driving, my buddy and I would walk down and they had a game called Kangaroo. You ever heard of it?
It rings a bell, actually. Is it?
Yeah.
Platform game or?
Platform game, and essentially you're a jumpy kangaroo that also has boxing gloves, and you punch these apes and you punch the things that throw at you, jump over them. I got really, really good at the game, and obviously nobody cares. It's Kangaroo, but I was really good at it, and I always had like all the top 10 high scores in there, and playing that for hours. Just good memories, right? Just good memories.
Yeah.
And then I guess one more memory that I would share would be I also started playing Street Fighter a lot. Oh. Now, granted, there are some absolute monsters out there. You go to the arcades, but I would play Zangief, and I was pretty darn good at learning how to block and had good timing with my throws and things. And I would school people quite a bit. And I remember one time, this is the memory I'm trying to tell you about, was that I went to a random 7-Eleven. I was such an addict. I was probably like 20 then, I think. And I remember driving by a 7-Eleven, and I'm like, I want to play Street Fighter. And they're all, back then, when I was, every 7-Eleven had Street Fighter, right? And so I go in there and I'm playing, and the kid comes in to play me, because that was pretty common. and I kept beating him. And I noticed he got frustrated. He's probably like 12 or something, 13 maybe. And he looks up at me and he says, "Aren't you too old to be playing this?" He says to me, right? And I said, "If you beat me, I'm too old," was my answer. That being said, again, many people, like even actually Mike Latham, could beat me pretty well with Chun-Li. I think it was about 50-50, I think. But I'm not the best Street Fighter, but just good memories, right? So those are some of my memories of it. Now you're talking about how kind of it got me going into wanting to get into video games, was a point you're going to say, right?
I'd love to know how. Was it always in the background you want to work in the industry?
So no. So here, what's interesting is I think a lot of my interests and a lot of my life experience led up to where I was going to be doing video games, but I never knew it. So additionally, and very much related, around the age of 10 or so, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
And I still play it. I'm still a huge fan, and I have all those 3D terrain and hundreds of painted minis and all that, and trying to have a really amazing experience for my players. And it's a great game. How that relates is it teaches you how to be creative, how to problem solve, how to entertain, because you're almost like in a beta test all the time of how do I get people to understand clues to a puzzle? How do I pose problems that are solvable? How can I be reflexive and improvise what would happen next based on what they do? Those things are very much what designers kind of have to figure out, aside from the technical part. And so with playing video games a lot, playing role-playing games a lot, I just had interest, right? Like a lot of people. I mean, how many people play D&D and play video games in the 80s, right? A lot.
Yeah.
And so, so then I was going to a junior college, and in all honesty, I was screwing around because I was working in a grocery store that paid pretty well back then. They don't so much now, but they had a good union, and I was there for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
And it was, I was also doing martial arts, so I thought maybe I might do something with that someday. But really, I was just kind of, making more money than I needed and enjoying my life, and things are pretty chill. And then the owner of this place called Macaulay's Food Villa, it was in San Jose. Unfortunately, he passed away at only 37.
Oh,
and yeah, it's very sad. And what's funny is bad things can become big stories, big changes in life. So because he passed away, the owner, the mom, decided to just close down the stores, like just 3 stores. And so when it closed down, I was temporarily looking for some work. And my roommate, he was working a lot of temp jobs, and he happened to be working at SEGA as a tester at the time. And so he said, "Hey, they're hiring. You want to see, get a job as a temp?" And I said, "Cool. It doesn't pay as much, but I can do this for a little while and then go back to grocery store, right? Because again, that's where I made the money." And so this was back when SEGA was just gaining all the momentum, right? Like Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was, I think, in test at this time, whatever. And so I came in, and they needed bodies, and so they just brought me in. And I'll tell you that my very first experience when I first walked in the door was just as it was really cool. I was like, wow, look at all this SEGA paraphernalia and stuff, all these, the activity and the energy is it's kind of cool. But I felt like, I mean, I don't know anything about this stuff. I'm just going to come in and test games and do my job, right? So they sat me down, and it was so packed at this point. There was an office, and I was sitting on a floor with another tester, and we had a kind of a Game Gear ROM kit thing where you play a Game Gear game on a system where you could put in a ROM chip, right? And so we're playing Streets of Rage 2 for the Game Gear. This is the very first game that I ever tested. And once I started playing, I was like, wow. And I remember turning to the guy saying, we get paid for this? It was so cool to be able to do that, right? Yeah. There's so much more to it, right? But still, that's that, wow, this is really cool. And so again, I'm going to try to answer more questions instead of going off on too much of tangents. But okay, but maybe about, I'm going to say maybe a month or so in, one day I was walking to the break room. So the break room was where Street Fighter was. And Mike Latham had actually purchase that machine, which I found out later because he wanted as kind of a way to play off some ideas he had for his fighting game, which again, I didn't know about any of this yet. So I'm walking down the hall. I remember off to the left, I see is all these cool, looks like fighting game characters, right? And they're done this really cool art. I think this was by Ernie Chan, who did Conan art back in the day. I'm pretty sure it was him, but it was really cool art. And then I saw stacks of martial art videos as well as Panther Productions, like how to do Jeet Kune Do, Taekwondo, Kempo. It was like all, and been doing martial arts since I was 13. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I was just like literally just excited just that it existed. Like, wow, this. And so I started. Mike Latham was there. Didn't know who he was, and so I started talking to him. Found out he's the producer and is designing this game, and just in absolute excitement and interest with no ulterior motives. I said, hey, if I could do anything to help, I've been playing video game, fighting games for a long time, doing martial arts for a long time. I'd be happy to do anything I could to help because it sounds like a really cool game, right?
Yeah.
Not long after that, he reached out and he asked if I could be on a team that would be sent to Sega Interactive to do some game balancing on the game, which is kind of like what I found out later was an audition for being assistant producer, but I didn't know that.
Wow.
And so, I guess I'll stop there because I can keep going all the way up to now. But he allowed me the opportunity to then go in and do that. I guess I will tell the one part, which is because at this point I'm still a temp, right? So I'll tell you more about my Eternal Champions experience later because I think it needs its own little kind of conversation.
Yeah. We got questions about that.
Yeah, because it's so important, right? But so when I was working on the game at Sega Interactive, essentially the game balancing was essentially to get in the nitty gritty of how does the game play, how do we make it, the frames of animation as it relates to the gameplay, the damage, the recovery rates, modifying some collision boxes with the engineers to make sure that everything kind of jived, just trying to make it as good as we could because it also had a super tight schedule. The game was huge, lots of marketing behind it and all that stuff. And so luckily I was 25 at the time, and so I didn't die, but we worked a lot of hours. It was my buddy Harry Chavez and I, who ended up, he actually was my best friend for quite a few years after this. But he and I, we just killed ourselves, but had a great time working on that. And then when I came out of it, a little more time went by. And at that point, an opportunity came up. And Mike said, I want you to be an assistant producer for me. And I was like, that's amazing. Cool. I would love to do this. Wow. One side note I would make on all this, which is because you're saying about how I got into it, which was I didn't think that I could do it because like, well, I need to know how to code or need to be able to do some kind of art or something else that would require an education related to that. Back then, back in the early 90s, there was very little, right? It was still a lot of kind of Wild West kind of stuff. And, do you have the skill set? And so once I saw the things that were involved with being a producer, which is interpersonal communication, problem solving, being analytic, communicating, getting people to talk to each other, making decisions based on information. Those are just kind of things that you kind of have as traits, I think, or at least you can. And so, I said, yeah, you know what? I think I can actually do this. And that was also a big thing for me because I hadn't really done a lot in my life so far as like exciting. Like I was very happy with my life, right? I'm like anybody, you don't need to be doing video games to be important. But I said, this is my opportunity. Like I knew as soon as I had, even before I was assistant producer, once I realized what it entails, said, Mike Latham knows me. I'm doing some high profile projects. I am going to absolutely kick ass no matter what it takes. And so that was really why I was able to make that leap and impress Mike enough to give me the opportunity and then continue to work hard to make it worth it, to make sure that Mike hired me for the right reason and not like, oh, he didn't turn out so well, right? So that's basically that.
Incredible.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story. Now I don't want to belittle game testers, nothing, it's a really important job. But how long were you doing that for, Erik, then? Not that long, it sounds.
Yep. So a year and a half.
Oh, sorry. So a good chunk of time. What games did you test, and was there any particular moments that you thought, "Wow, I'm making a big difference to this one game"? And how would you explain a game tester? Because I think they sometimes not get a bad name, but they don't always get the limelight.
Yeah, well, so I'm glad. I know we talked a little bit before this, and I wanted to talk about the test department. So one of the coolest things about Sega Test was that it was at a time when you couldn't just do a patch and be like Cyberpunk and just ship it and then we'll fix it later, right? You had to have games that were solid, and that meant that testers had a lot of responsibility to make sure they find those innocuous crash bugs or other things that are game breaking, because once the games are out there, they're out there. And it's also the reputation of Sega, right? I think in a lot of ways they saw themselves as kind of a bit of the quality of like a Disney kind of franchise where everything they release should be, not in a buggy game. And so that plus just the people that put it together, the people that ran it. And I've worked with some great QA people, but this is probably the best test department I ever worked with. And I'll tell you, there's one reason to also make all my friends who might be listening from later QA groups that I knew, is that the difference is, again, you didn't have the opportunity to patch stuff. And so in more recent ones, when I was working like, say, Gazillion on Marvel Heroes or something, it was constantly being updated, constantly updated. So staff is small. What's the main problems? Let's fix the main problems. Let the other ones kind of slide. So it's a different environment. And so you had to be a lot more military and organized in the old days because time was limited, resources were limited, and you had to ship the game. And so we had day and night crew at its height. Wow. I forget. I think Mike Latham said it's something like 100 people or something. That sounds about right. And you'd walk in, if you're just a tester and not a lead or something, you would walk in. It would show what your game assignment is. Which was either exciting or heartbreaking. If you're, oh, that game's so cool, I can't wait to play this. Or Little Mermaid Game Gear again, right? Yeah. And so you would then get a test plan. So the test plans entail all the things that the game can do, everything from going through menus to finishing the game in a different mode, to playing a character, to using a certain power. And because there's so many of them, it would be dispersed amongst the testers of that day, right? So you might get, like, you're just gonna play level 1 over and over again and do these different things. And you have tick marks and things, and then you put in hours. And then at the end of the day, you'll go to the database and write bugs. And they had, of course, a format that they would use. And it was pretty disciplined, frequency, where, what it should do, all that kind of stuff. It would be redlined. We had a guy that would do red lines and make sure the grammar was good so the developers could read it. The leads would come in and ask questions if they don't get it. They also might duplicate, say, oh, Bill Person found this one already, so we're going to duplicate that, right? And then you would go through the cycles and you get new versions from the developer, and you would verify the fixes are made, all that stuff. And so you would go through that, a lot of crunch time. The great thing was everybody's hourly, and a lot of these guys just did nothing but kind of hang out and play video games. So they're like, cool, I'll stay for the weekend, right? And another great memory of Sega is Sega Test was that every Friday during the season, Seinfeld would be ran at the beginning. So you sit down for about 30 minutes, and it was just great because that was when the show was at its top, and you're hanging out with all your friends, you're doing video game stuff. It was just great, and so Sega Test was also really interesting. It had a diverse amount of people that would be in there, because these were a lot more like the stereotyped ones, the guys that would basically smoke pot and come and test video games, right? Not all of them, right? I didn't. Yeah. But that there's a lot of different types of people that come in. But then you have people that are going onto a big college later or whatever, people that have aspirations of being an engineer. So you had a mix of people. Yeah. So we have people that went on to be CEOs of their own company, people that stayed in the video game industry like me for many, many years, people that did a lot of things and just went on to do cool things, people that just went in totally different directions and did different stuff. Yeah. But then, we've had, because it's such a big group of people, it's like a microcosm of humanity. And so we had some great things and some sad things too, right? Like we had a friend of several of us, mine included. He was unfortunately murdered. I think it may have been drug related, but that was heartbreaking because I had seen him like, the week before, right? Yeah. We've had, but then we've also had people got married there, but then also divorced while they're also still working together. So lots of different things. But I'm friends with a lot of them, and I cannot say enough good things about the Sega testers. They're just really, they were a good group. So there's a lot to it, and I'm glad I did that first because I understood that part of it. Because as a producer, you need to understand that.
We've had James Purple Hampton on the show before. He was a tester for LucasArts, and he went on to make Alien vs Predator on the Jaguar. A very good game on the Jaguar. And he did tell me, he said literally that the testing in a previous company really made a massive difference for his future career making video games. And it sounds like you echo that as well. And testers, they play a really important role, don't they? Let's be honest. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, a thing I wanted to say was that because I've touched a lot of product and because I was the lead on certain things is why I get opportunity to talk to you, right? But people that like maybe a really good artist or a really good junior engineer or a great test team that worked on a game, they all made a difference. It's my job. I would just be a guy with ideas is all it would be if I didn't have all those other people that I worked with, right? So yeah, I mean, they're all important. Testers important, and it does make a difference. Before I forget, because I would kill myself. So you talked to Mike Latham about the I don't know if he told you what the of the YouTube channel was, but Hermanos de Midgar. It's a 5-hour-long biography about him.
Incredible, yeah, I've seen parts of it.
Yeah, so he discovered it, right? He's like, oh my God, right? This guy, his name's Oscar Gonzalez. He actually has 4 names, being Spanish, but he has done this great work. And then because I commented and started talking to him, he's also doing a biography on my work. And so I'm obviously super flattered. One of the biggest things about this to me is that my daughter, especially my youngest one who's 2, my oldest one's 19, she'll still want to see it, but that when they get older, they can see this. Here's my dad, they're talking about all the way back from, because this guy, Oscar, I mean, he does so much research and he goes all the way back to literally when you were born. And so that's why Mike's is 5 hours long. And so I just want to give him a plug on your show. Hermanos de Midgar is the name of the YouTube channel. Now, it is in Spanish, so definitely if you have any Spanish-speaking listeners, they should definitely see these. But it's also captioned in English, as you know, because you've seen it.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure to plug that before I forget. Now, I did kind of lose track of what we were just talking about, so maybe you can remind me.
We were just talking about the importance of testing, really, and so really run through some really quick games you tested. Was it Sonic Spinball? Were you actually producing that game, or?
So I know that list of games, right? So I'll need to go in at some point and update Moby Games and IMDb because it's really like some of them are wrong or I just got a credit. Somebody just put me in there. But I did a lot more. This is actually a question you have later, so we'll talk about that later. But speaking specifically on Sonic Pinball, I do believe I was a system producer on it. And that just means I was helping the producer on various aspects of getting the game through QA and all that stuff. Now, this is a main thing I want to say about the roles of producers at Sega working on a Japanese product. We, for the most part, not a whole lot of credit we should be taking for it because we just made sure that the game was localized properly, that the content didn't have something strangely offensive, and then made sure that it went through QA because there's always bugs with the US system or something maybe that Japan didn't find. Working with marketing and working on getting a test plan with the testers, all those things. There are some games that I touched on more. We can talk about Blazing Heroes, later. But so far as most of the Japanese games I worked on, I do have some stories about some of them, but most of them I basically just took it and helped ship it. It was exciting to be the producer on it because it's like, wow, I'm in charge of this thing going to market in the U.S., right? And they were amazing games, and also taught me a lot as a producer and a later designer. And so so yes. Now Sonic Pinball. I believe you had a question about Sonic Pinball too, right?
I think we got a social media question at the end. We can say it at the end if you want. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
You mentioned before off air, Erik, you've met some pretty big celebrities, some big names, and Michael Latham told a great story about meeting Michael Jackson, and Mac Senor, credit to him, he gave some great stories about meeting Joe Frazier and some other boxers. Yep. It sounds like an amazing place. You were at Sega for a good number of years, and I would love to hear some stories about maybe Michael Jackson, I think MC Hammer, anyone maybe else you've kind of met. I know it's arguably my favorite part of the podcast when I hear about these amazing names. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure. I mean, it's you know, I'm sure that I'm going to leave some stuff out in our cast here. So sometimes when things come to mind, I want to bring it up.
Yeah.
And so once things are really going, once I understood where I was, what I could be doing or was doing, it was an amazing, magical time, because this is where I think I could relate the most to a lot of your listeners, where it's like, wow, it'd be so cool to work at Sega. Well, unlike Mike Latham, was very seasoned. He was an accomplished, smart, technical producer, business guy. Like, he knew all this stuff by the time he started working at Sega. So I'm sure he loved working at Sega. But for me, I was like Ant-Man joining the Avengers, right? I was like, wow, look at all these heroes around me. This is so cool, right? And so it was exciting and magical, and just going to my favorite memories I had was going to our all hands meeting. And it would be a big ballroom in a nearby hotel, which I got married at later, 20 years later, which is kind of funny. But that he would show, here's how we're doing against Nintendo. Back then is actually when we were actually taking the share of the revenue over Nintendo of America. We actually were winning, which it was fairly short-lived, but a big deal. But then he would show Tom Kalinske, right? Awesome guy. He would show all the Sega commercials before they even came out. And, you know, with the Sega Scream, and I mean, we just loved it. It's like, you know, we felt like we're winning. We're part of this great team. I worked on that game that this commercial he just showed me, you know, so it was great. Now, to go back, because I just told you I did tangent, so I don't forget, to go back to the celebrities. So the funny thing was, I didn't actually get to see anybody, but I have two great stories.
Yeah.
So the first was Michael Jackson. So he came in during the day shift. And like I said, there's day and night shift, right? And at this time I was working the night shift. And so it's one or the other. It may have been I was in a day shift and it just ended. But either way, my buddy, again, Harry and I, they already said, like, nobody can do anything but act normal, right? And so, and additionally, if you're not supposed to be there, you can't be there, right? And so we knew he was coming. And so we parked right in front of the entrance to Sega. It was at this time just one building, right in front of the entrance. Like, he backed his car up, so we would be like 20 feet from the door. Like, we would see him. We would make sure to see him, right?
Yeah.
So we sat there for I don't know how long, waiting for him. And then a little while later, we saw somebody drive up, and then we say, "Hey, is Michael Jackson still there?" I said, "Oh no, he left like an hour ago through the side exit." So, being a celebrity, that's what they do, right? So he snuck out the side. So it was kind of funny that we had waited so much time, and he just went right out the side door. Now, the funnier one is MC Hammer. So he came over, and he's a big sports guy. I don't know if you know that. And so he wanted to play Joe Montana football with our best QA guy. This guy named Keith. And he was really good. Keith was really good at the game. And I wasn't there because I didn't get to meet him, but I had heard, and this is like, again, I think it was another part of the building or something like that, right? But he beat him like 49-3 or something. He just destroyed him. It was so funny that MC Hammer is the one that won. MC Hammer just comes in, he's like, never played the game, understands football. He's played football video games before, and he just destroyed him and left. So that was pretty fun. Now, okay, so I take it back. It's been 25 years. I did see him leaving in his really awesome. I forget what kind of sports car it was now. I can't remember. It was like I want to say it's a DeLorean because there actually weren't great cars, but it was something fancy like that, right? Yeah. So I remember him driving off with his big, huge bodyguard who could barely fit in the car. So that's smart. So I have more I can tell you later. I met a lot of people when I was Electronic Arts, but that goes into the post Sega. But we could talk about that at some point in the podcast if you'd like.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, those are two celebrity stories. Because I'm the boots on the ground guy, I didn't get to meet Joe Montana when he was talking about the football, which I would have loved. He's my favorite athlete, for a long time, and I would have loved to have seen him, but it's okay,
Who do you support then? Are you a big American football fan then?
Oh yes. So grew up in the Bay Area, so I was a 49ers fan. And
right.
Just around the time when I was really starting to understand the game, really getting into it, because keep in mind I was playing D&D and video games, usually not also an intense sports fan usually. And so, but about the time I really started paying attention was when Joe Montana, who still had some legs in him, they let him go to Kansas City Chiefs.
Right, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yes, and at that point, I was a big Joe Montana fan. And so, again, I don't know if I'm going to mention his name again, but my buddy Harry and I, we were both Joe Montana fans. So we said, that's it, we're Chiefs fans now. And I have been to 6 Chiefs games. I've followed them all throughout the years. He only played for 2 seasons, right? Joe Montana.
Okay.
But for 20-some years, and they just finally won the Super Bowl earlier this year, right after me following them for 25 years, they finally won. So I'm a big Kansas City Chiefs fan and love Joe Montana. And of course, things like boxing and, MMA, stuff like that.
Amazing. No, good stuff. So I've got here, I mean, you kind of mentioned a bit earlier that getting promoted quite early on, and you never really had, it sounds early on, especially when you first walked in Sega, aspirations to hang around too long, but you were soon promoted to an assistant producer, became a producer on many titles, huge games. I mean, I've got here like Eternal Champions, which we'll talk about a bit more. I've got the Lion King, Virtua Fighter, Ristar, Golden Axe, and you said here Moby Games is not completely up to date, so please, if I've forgotten some other massive titles, feel free to chip in, Eric.
Yeah, well, so I can tell you this, right? So I didn't go through and analyze. I think there's probably about 5 or so games from Sega that maybe aren't on that list. But those for the most part are ones that, again, I helped shepherd out the door, right? Now, but I do have stories on several, and I can talk about several.
I'd love to hear some stories about the games, yeah.
And I think I assume a lot of your viewers would too. People would play the games back then or whatever. So one of them is a very interesting one, and this is going to be jumping ahead a little bit. I was working on a game, an RPG from Japan. And it was a cool little game. It was a Saturn game. I don't know if it's the first Saturn RPG it was 3D, because I like 3D kind of textured kind of characters and stuff. But we got the translations for it, and it was I don't know who translated, but it was garbage, right? And so I had the opportunity. I had the opportunity to rewrite the story in a way to be concise, hopefully a little clever, even change the story a little bit to make it more interesting. And how that worked was, first off, I just had the okay, because I showed, it may have been Micah showed it to. I said, this is we can't ship, like, this is horrible. And rather than ask somebody else to redo it, because I was also playing the game, so I understood the flow of the story and the characters involved and all that stuff. So I wrote, and I was sent out the stuff to Sega of Japan, and they were really cool about putting the stuff in. And I was getting it, it was looking good. I was feeling really good about the quality of that part. I was working really hard at it because it was the first time I've professionally written to that degree. And so we got about maybe 3/4 of the way through. And this is about the time that I'm assuming that Sega was getting their numbers in for Saturn and seeing how they were doing in relation to Sony and all that. And I think that the relationship between SOJ and SOA at that time, the power level was different. So because SOA was doing so well for so long, Sega of Japan was very accommodating for a long time. Budget, greenlighting games, all that kind of stuff. Like they were very amenable to stuff. And I will always say good things about them, by the way. But it was obvious that there was a shift, because I was 3/4 of the way done, and the producer in Japan that was helping process all this translation, he said, "Yeah, our exec producer said we're not doing that anymore." Oh. And I said, "We can't not do it. I said, it's like I have partially written story, right? And they said, no, they can't. And so I don't remember if I went to Mike and Mike talked to them, or I don't know, whatever it was, there was no opportunity to get it in. And so what happened was that the reviews came out, and I warned them, by the way. The reviews came out, and I did send you that one review, that one snippet, right? And so in the snippet, it said, well directed, nice flow, pleasant, good game, but then it starts to fall apart at the end and gets really confusing and muddled. That's exactly what, and they're speaking specifically to the story in the script, right? Because the gameplay was the gameplay, which was fine. It was a good game. But I was like, they literally caused bad reviews by not a comment, which would not have taken that much more effort, But I think it was the thing, like, we're not helping them anymore because they failed us, right? And another story on that game, which is interesting. So I forget the original name, but it was a strange name that wouldn't. This is something a lot of Sega of America producers can take credit for, which is helping to rename games, working with marketing to rename games to be something that makes sense. Sometimes they still don't make sense, but so I remember as producer, I went to QA and we did just come up with names, and we had a huge name list, and we ended up coming out with Realms of Mystaria, Mystaria, I think. Yes, and so sounded good to us. Sounded very role-playing game-ish, and Realms of, and a fancy name. We released it. We weren't that long out there, but then suddenly found out we got sued by TSR, the owners of Dungeons & Dragons, because Mystara is a setting that they had released not too long before that. So what happened was either my subliminal influence, because I played D&D, but I didn't use that realm, so I didn't pay attention. It may have come in, and it was one of the things I offered, or maybe a QA person or somebody had that, but it sounded good. So we had to pull it off the shelves and rename it. And I was actually quizzed by the lawyers about how we came up with the name, and it was very intimidating because, it was still fairly early on in my career, and I felt like if I say the wrong thing, I might get fired. Like, you're the guy that screwed up. Luckily, I was able to tell them. I said, hey guys, give me a list of names. We put it through legal, right? You guys, and legal approved it. And but I guess Mystaria and Mystara, and it was for whatever reason legal didn't catch it. So we renamed it Blazing Heroes, which is what most people know it as, because there's fewer Realms of Mystaria that are out there. So so that's that story. And obviously, so I had a lot of things going on, good and bad, with that.
I've got another sorry, do you own those two copies yourself? Do you own both versions for the different?
I might. So I've moved so many times. I think we should continue just conversing in general, and I'll see if I can dig up some old stuff. But I've moved so many times that a lot of those things aren't around anymore, which sucks. I mean, you always regret stuff like that, right? Yeah. But I might still have it. But the truth is, if not, you could probably buy it online, so probably somebody has it. But anyway, so another story was working on Virtua Fighter 2 for the Genesis.
That's amazing. That's the fact they're trying to get that on the Mega Drive.
Yeah. I mean, I was really impressed. I mean, the game played completely solid, because the reality is Virtua Fighter really, in a lot of ways, plays like a 2D game. At least it continues to kind of shift the players within a step or two. I'm not saying it's a 2D game, but it worked for what it needs to do. And so the game played a little bit like a hybrid 2D, 3D game, but it's pretty much identical to the players. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, because again, I didn't do anything on this game. I didn't say, no, add a character or something, right? But what we did do, because there's no voice, when it was the end of a match and you beat, the endings were really generic. They're like, you should try and be stronger next time, or just something, because they were just, whatever it was that Japan gave us, it was just like things to say. So this is just a fun story. I don't think it made the game better, but being in QA for so many years and playing fighting games with people, we had so many obnoxious call-outs we would give to each other when we would win, right? Like, for example, we'd say stuff like, you'd beat somebody after some heated battle in Street Fighter, and you'd say, I'm asking myself a question right now. Where's the challenge? right? We would always we had so many of those, right? And so we basically made a collection of those, and we tried to match them the best with the characters that would have to say those kind of things. And so a lot of our old jokes, and I confirmed this by going on YouTube the other night. I said, yeah, there it is. You know, I forget which character is saying some of the stuff that we put as inside jokes. So that was kind of funny. Again, not something that made the game. Oh, kind of made the game better. It's kind of cute, cheeky, right?
That's good fun, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, and I don't think so far as Sega Japan games. I mean, I have like little things like Ristar and Estal for Saturn later. But again, I didn't do anything for those, but those were pretty memorable projects to work on just because of the games that they were, right? I guess you just keep talking then. I could tell you about Estal and Ristar, right?
Well, yeah, definitely, please, yeah.
Yeah, so for Ristar, what was interesting with that was I didn't know it when I first got it, but they, you know, because a lot of times you just get assigned. Sometimes you get to pick, but usually you get assigned the games. And I found, oh, this is the guys that did Sonic. I was like, whoa, this is the Sonic guys? And as soon as I connected, like, oh, I could see now, because it was a very tightly, well-crafted role design game, right? Characters interesting, the environment, this music, everything was just on point. Obviously slower and purposely so than you know, Sonic, but the problem with that game was something happened to Eternal Champion Sega CD, which is that it came out late.
Yeah.
Yeah, I as I recall, they tried to release the game to breathe a little more life into the Genesis before it was kaput completely, right? Yeah. And it was a good game. It probably sold fairly well, but it never could get that momentum because the game was already, people already like looking forward to the next system, right? Yeah. And what else about that? I think that's basically it, but to me it's just interesting reflecting upon that. Oh, was that later on I realized, oh, you know, because Donkey Kong with the SNES, they tried to kind of do that with the 3D rendered kind of look on the, you know, I think they were trying to do something similar. And so the strategy was good. It was unfortunate. My point about all that with that game, it's unfortunate it didn't come out like a year earlier, because I think it would have been more popular. But I mean, it's out there and people played it, and people who could hear about it could probably find it and play. And so it's not like it can't be played now, right? And then Estal, the only reason I would mention that game is, do you remember this game at all, by the way? Estal?
Estal? No, I don't recall it, I'm afraid, Eric. Sorry.
Okay, so guys can look it up later, but it was a Saturn game. Funny thing was, it was kind of similar to Ristar in a way, in that it had a character who was kind of similarly visually envisioned, and it had like kind of single move kind of things, but it was a more pleasant, relaxing platformer. But it was a really pleasant little game. And the reason I mentioned this was, these are like small things, but the voiceover person who came in to do all the voiceover for the US side, there was this really talented lady, and I was helping to direct it, and I thought she did a great job, and I was, you know, giving her some cues and giving her feedback, and it's great. So when we're done, and I was really happy with it, I heard from the sound engineer, the guy who's in charge of like of the music team, sound stuff. He said, she was really upset. She thought you didn't like her stuff. I was like, what? So yeah, it's kind of a weird thing that I guess, who knows what I said. But this was a good lesson for me to always be hypersensitive to the things I say, so that they're read the right way by people, because you want to make sure that they understand especially when they're doing something right. So it's just an interesting kind of tidbit for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the sound stayed in the game, is that right? They weren't removed or anything?
Oh no, yeah, all her voiceover stuff is in there. It was all good. It was good.
That is odd. Let's talk a bit more about Eternal Champions, if that's all right.
Of course.
Michael has mentioned you a couple of times, and he said that you built a very good, you know, he considers you a really good friend. I think he even mentioned at one point, again, I don't want to bring up some bad memories, but he said that you had a little, not falling out, but you didn't quite see eye to eye at a certain period. But there's very strong mutual respect there. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Eric. You can fill it in. But he really saw something in you, he said, and he was really proud of what you've done and what you've achieved. And he said, Eternal Champions. I think he's more talking about the sort of the Mega CD version, but feel free to correct me. It wouldn't be the game without you. Is that how would you reflect on Eternal Champions? When did you get your teeth into that game? What was your kind of relationship with Michael Latham, if you don't mind?
Well, so I can talk to a lot of ad nauseum. So first off, I think it's super important that when everybody listening to me know, I think Mike Latham is an amazing human being, let alone all the stuff he's done in video games. He gave me an opportunity. He supported me, and he has just done nothing but fair-minded kind of stuff. Any issues we had, especially in retrospect, as a 53-year-old man, was just nothing. It's not even worthy of talking about. I have great memories of when I was there. He was Odin and I was Thor, even though I didn't have blonde hair. And then our friend Bill Person, who I'm sure he's mentioned to you, the producer, because he was a little more conniving. He was Loki, right? But I mean, it was just great. Working for him was awesome. I mean, so I think one reason you might mention this is because a lot of successful people are very type A, and so sometimes that can be abrasive, right? But he was just very focused. He wanted good work. He wanted Sega to succeed. He cared tons about his projects. He was working on every single one. Obviously, Eternal was his baby. So I mean, working with him was great, and I learned a lot. He helped me, with all these opportunities, and he once he gave me opportunities to do stuff by myself, he just kind of let me do it. So I want to get all that stuff aside. I have nothing but good things to say about him. Now, so far as Eternal, so I feel like I was working on Eternal from 1993 until 1995, straight, because I was either working on the Genesis game with him, which is more short-lived because it was like it's already in production, get it out. But that was really intense, and that was the part I talked about earlier when I went in with Harry Chavez. And then after that was done, he had already gotten the green light for the Sega CD version, right? And this is actually the one that he was actually alluding to, because I helped game balance, but the game would have been pretty similar, I think, without me. I didn't revamp the fighting system, I didn't do anything. Whereas the Sega CD version, which is when he sent me on site with a couple QA guys that were kind of working with me, for me, helping me out. And that was where I was able to redesign the combat system. I was able to come up with entire movesets for some of the new characters, special moves for many of the characters, because we added, of course, special moves to them, as well as criteria for how do you get a Senna kill, for example, or how do you do a Vendetta, getting stuns, all those kind of those nuanced kind of things. And so working on that Eternal CD was probably my single best memory in the industry, was working on the game, because at that time, the team I worked with at Sega Interactive were great. They were all awesome. Like, they were good-natured, hardworking. Rod Nakamoto and his wife that were in charge there, they were great. It was just a super cool time to work. It was funny, I remember too, that was back when O.J. Simpson trial was going on. And I remember we would have our breaks in the break room with the TV on and watch the O.J. Simpson, and we worked 7 days a week. 5 days a week we would be watching the trial and then going back and doing our work. But yeah, I mean, just working on the game, and then it got better and better and better. And this is a game that actually was released the quality I think that it could have been. And it was late. I don't remember how late, but it was a good quality game. Now, I don't know if Mike told you or if you've done research on it, but it was on like 7 or 8 video game magazine covers. And the reviews all across the board were like 8 and above on all of them. Because I'm proud of that project. I think we did good. It was like if you take these amazing characters that he built and the world that he built, integrating this, all the animations, all the cinematics and things that are tied into the story and the characters. I don't know if Mike also told you, but almost all of the disc was filled up with content.
Oh, really?
Yes. Between all the characters, the hidden characters, the moves, all the music, all the cine kills, all elaborated animated kills. Like it almost took the entire disc, which is definitely a bragging point because that's hard to do. So a nice story for you was that because I wasn't there on site nonstop for a year and a half or whatever, I was back a lot in Redwood City, and I would have Sega testers come over for big barbecue and Troll Champions. And so we would, all the guys, and some guys tested our games, some didn't, but I'd probably have like 20 plus people come over from Sega Test I used to work with. We'd all have barbecues and we'd just play tournaments. So I don't know if you remember, right? There's all those tournaments in the Sega CD version. Are you familiar with that or not?
I put my hands up. I used to own the Mega Drive version. I've never actually played the Mega CD version, Tree. I put my hands up. I'm sorry, Eric.
That's fine. That's fine.
I've heard it is a definitive version, though. I've heard many good things about it.
Yeah, and this is totally fine. And actually, you're part of that story of why it's a shame about the game, because the game came out when the system was already, I was already dead. It was like one of the last games that I think Sega released themselves. And so the sales were nowhere near what they needed to be. The reviews were amazing. But that's why people like actually this Oscar Gonzalez guy I told you about, what he did it specifically because he loved Troll Champions so much and the Sega TD version. But I was really proud of that game, and you know, the opportunity to do what I did, and the ability to not ship the game too early, which is so common. So many games, and you've played them, you know.
Yep.
If only this game seems like it's not complete. Like, oh, you know, a lot of times that's just the case. Like the games just get released too early because you have to. So yeah, I mean, I think, and then you also did some of the press tour stuff for that as well, which was a lot of fun. Got to go all over the U.S. with our PR team and talk the game up, because as Mike told you, he's, for a guy who's so outgoing and kick ass, he doesn't really like to do a lot of press stuff, and so I became the guy. And so it was fun because I got to go to Minnesota and New York, all over, and then also sometimes be interviewed for different video game magazines. Wow, I'm in the Game Informer. That's so cool, right? Nice. Like I was still young in my industry, but it's exciting to be in there, right? Yeah. It's exciting to be in the magazine. So, yeah. So that's Eternal in a nutshell. But it was amazing. It was a really good time.
I mean, do you have a favorite character, Eternal Champion Fighter? And also, I'm going to annoy you now, finishing move. It's not called a finishing move, is it? It's called a you have to put.
Well, so there's a few different names. There's sudden deaths. There's vendettas. There's Senna kills, and now I forget. There's two different versions for the background kills. What is the other one? Not sudden death. See, it's been a long time. But so I could tell you on all those. So I think my favorite character so far as effective, because he had the best moveset, was probably Ramses. Because I was able to design both his regular moveset and his special moveset, and so I knew, you know, someone jumps, they do this. If they're this distance, you do that. If you're low on health before the round's over, you do this. All these different kind of tactics, as well as just the combos felt pretty smooth. So I liked him. And then the thing is, I'll tell you, I have a soft spot for all of them. I mean, even and since you didn't play the Sega CD version, but even the Yappy the dog, the little hidden little pup that you could fight as, but all of those were fun in different ways. But Chin-Wo was one I liked because he did monkey style kung fu, and he had a cool hoop that he would use as a weapon, and being able to design out those moves as well as design out the special moves was just a joy. And so he's probably my single favorite, but man, I mean, they're all cool. So far as background kills, so the Senna kills, I know you didn't play it, but are you familiar with what a Senna kill is? If not,
remind me, Eric, please. Yeah.
Totally fine. And I'm not offended, by the way. Again, you're exactly the example of why the game didn't do well. Like, you're already moving on to stuff when that came out.
Yeah, sorry.
So, yeah. So the Senna kills were basically the Dark Champion would come in, and he would grab the loser of the fight and pull them into this cinematic, like a Freddy Krueger kind of killing cinematic, right? And so you would have, for example, Shadow would get killed by multiple throwing stars, right? Like they just come out, fly to shoot, kill, whatever. But my favorite was Trident. Of course, you remember him.
Yeah.
He appears in this. He's in this tower with the Dark Champion. They always start in the same place. Like it's the Dark Champion. They're like, "What's going on?" And he puts his hand out and he turns Triton into a fish. And the camera zooms and you see the fish kind of flopping around, and the eyeball is like frantically looking around, and then you see the foot of the Dark Champion. He goes, and it goes to black, and you're a squish, right?
Wow.
So that was one. And then a Vendetta. So the Vendettas are basically, like the Mortal Kombat equivalent of fatalities, right? So these were added also. And there's one with Larson. And it's very simple, but it was just brutal. So he grabs the opponent by their lapel, and he pulls out one of his sais, and he stabs him in the stomach again and again and again. And at first, the character's screaming on the first few stabs, and you see the blood gushing out, and then it stops screaming, and it just keeps stabbing. It just keeps seeing the splurt. He must have stabbed probably 15 times before it stops. It's so over the top. It's like it was just bad. And then two other honorable mentions was that the Midnight Background, and I don't remember if this was. I don't know if this was in the Sega CD version. The Genesis version. It was where you fall through a trap door and you go through, and there's these blades, and they kind of cut you as you go down the pit.
Ooh, I don't remember myself.
So you and your watchers can do themselves a favor and just look up all the kills for Eternal Champions, because there's several videos out there. It's back to back. And so this one is probably about 2 minutes long, I'm guessing. And you fall through this pit, and there's these blades and these saws and things that you're like this. And your character goes through, and he screams, and you see your character at that point. He's just like a husk with like his skin's all off, and he's like kind of like this. And he goes to another set, and then he's just like maybe like a head and an arm or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he goes to another set, and he's like just a skull. And the skull falls for a while until it hits the bottom of the pit and explodes. Have you seen this one now?
Yeah, I think I've seen that one.
Okay.
I've definitely seen it on YouTube. Yeah, it's great. It's so amazing.
And the last one is it's a simple one, but again, it's just so obnoxious. Was the shark kill in Riptide's background, which Riptide was Sega CD. You've seen that with the shark. So, but they were fine. Going back, by the way, to when we would play those, have those barbecue tournaments with the testers. There's also a mode in the tournament where you get extra points for doing kills. So you wouldn't just try and win a match. If you can actually maneuver a guy and knock him off the boat and have the shark eat him, you get extra points. So they'd be watching, and you'd be getting upper hand, and everybody, they've all tested the game, they know, and they'll start going, shark, 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 and then you knock them over, boom, everybody cheers, and the loser's got to sit there for like 20 seconds and watch the shark eat him. So there's no game like it so far as those moments,
I think I said to Michael, it's such a great game. I can't really speak too much about the Mega CD version, but it should have been released in the arcades. It should have competed against Mortal Kombat and even Street Fighter in the arcades. It was good enough. I personally think it's good enough.
So I would agree, and I think another thing that I was proud of that game, and this is for everybody. Again, I don't want to say, when I say I'm proud of it, it's not like I did it, everybody, but that very difficult to make a good fighting game from scratch, because if you look at Street Fighter, Virtua Fighter, Mortal Kombat, all these things came from arcade roots with big development teams, lots of times iteration. They developed the game over many years, whereas we had one shot. We had a finite amount of time, finite amount of people, and so it was a good game. And then again, the characters in the world were very interesting, right? And so there's that interest, right? So yeah, I mean, obviously Mike's talked to you about, the third version that he wanted to do that probably got nixed because Sega of Japan didn't want competition with Virtua Fighter, which again, they're two different games. So, but yeah, the thing is though, it's the year of the retro, or it's the decade of the retro games. It's like if Mike ever wanted to kind of, dust off his producer cap and put it back on, I mean, Kickstarter or something, I mean, for sure, it could completely be done again. And if not that game, because Sega owns it, an homage to it, right? So. Yeah.
Well, Streets of Rage 4 came out, and that was a homage to the classic series.
Yeah.
And there's honestly, when we posted our first ever text interview with Michael many years ago now, and it was largely about Eternal Champions. Loads of people are very interested. It's one of those games that a lot of people, I think, respect, and it doesn't always get the praise it deserves. It's kind of under the radar a little bit for Sega titles, personally. And actually, we've got a few social media questions at the end of the interview, Eric, but I'll sort of jump ahead here. Charlie Yu, who's a sort of a really good listener, kind of a member of Arcade Attack, actually, he asks, would you ever like to see a new Eternal Champions game, or even a HD remake of the originals? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, so I guess a good segue from the last conversation I just had, which is probably why you brought it up. So because retro is back, so I think, and even I know that Mike was planning to do a 3D game for the Eternal Champions 3, but it was almost a must back then. Everything was going 3D.
Yeah. If
you didn't have a 3D game, you were like behind the times. And now people appreciate the nuances and the differences of games that are 2D fighters. And there's actually 2D fighters have been coming out in the last 15 years, probably slowly trickling through the different systems. So I would imagine, as kind of a visual set, it would be still 2D, but it would be everything upgraded because of the technology we have. Yeah. If we had the license, just upgrade the characters, give them new outfits or things, make them different. But I think visually, it could just be a better looking game of that.
Yeah.
And then, but then there's so many ways you can elaborate that, right? So you could have, because so much of Mike's creation was the stories and the characters, right? Yeah, so you could take the story aspect and maybe do something like a choose your own adventure kind of thing with the characters talking, and that could lead into different combats. Like a lot of the Mortal Kombat games have done, but we could actually do it with choosing a path, because ultimately they just end up with fights anyway. So I mean, you could manage that. You could do things like you could unlock moves and come back and play through it again. You could have versions of it where it could play. So there was obviously experts didn't turn out as we would have liked, right? I'm familiar with that game at all, but taking that, have portions of the game that could be like a Streets of Rage Double Dragon kind of game, maybe even play with another person. The moveset, because it's 2D, you could probably pull off combos and do special moves, and that could be fun. That could be a portion of the game. So there's a lot you could do. But is the answer to that question, though, is yeah, for sure. Like, I think realistically, it'd have to be an homage, because I don't think Sega would ever part with it. I just think they're too, like, why would they? Like, you're going to give us how much money? No. Like, they would want so much money. But again, like, if Mike was able to do it again, he could just create all new characters. I mean, after being in the industry for so long, yeah, when people take your ideas, that sucks, but it's not like you're out of ideas, right? Make something new. So.
No, definitely. I would love to see it personally. Right, I want to talk about SegaSoft now. And Eric, I put my hands up again. It's one of those things that I don't know too much about. It's one of those things that I actually think we might cover in a future podcast. Just talk about SegaSoft, because it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable thing. And I honestly, I'm quite I'm not an expert at all, but it's. I'd love to know. Could you briefly explain what it's all about and how it was conceived, and were you involved in the whole? I know you're involved in the game in SegaSoft, but what's your views and your role on that particular project?
Yeah, well, so I don't know at what point I was a full producer. I think it was like right before SegaSoft became. Here's some things that I've surmised over the time, some things that I knew, but again, because I wasn't the guy in a lot of those bigger meetings.
Right. Okay.
I was the guy in the meetings about the games we're going to work on, as opposed to the strategy or why we're doing the entire endeavor, right? But here's my assumptions, right? Is that, again, Sega Saturn, for as cool as it was, and it had some really cool games, was just not competing well with Sony. And I think that there probably would have been a sizable amount of layoffs at Sega because of that. And so I think there was an opportunity they saw as, well, we have all this production staff that have made a lot of Sega games that they believed in. And so they basically created a startup, because it was a funded startup company, right? But it was tied to Sega by calling SegaSoft. Now, we didn't have carte blanche on anything Sega. Everything would have to be kind of negotiated and stuff. And as I recall, we did pretty much nothing that was straight up Sega. I might be wrong, but I don't think so. And so it was really more of like, in a way, think of it as games by people that made Sega games, right? Now, the other thing was that, more importantly, was they tried to take a different avenue. So because they continued Sega, right? Like some people went on to Sega proper, did Dreamcast and more Saturn games. That we were focused on the online kind of growth, which was people playing Quake, all those things. We wanted to become a hub where people come play our games, right? And that then we would create a lot of PC games that would then be exclusive to our site, right? So we also had a big interest in making online games that we could host. And so so we did that. We had this guy, Curtis Aldano, I say this guy, a producer and a friend of mine. He was in charge of a mod for Quake called The Bomb, which was unique to us, and we hosted it. And it was definitely the most popular thing we had on our online hosting site. And then we had a variety of products that came out, though. Not all of them were online only. So we had, actually, our biggest seller was Cosmopolitan's Virtual Makeover. Okay, so Cindy Claveren, she was with us back then, and it was like what it sounds like. You take a photo and you like put hair on and stuff, and people bought it up, and there's many different versions of it, and it did well. That was just an opportunity.
I think Michael said, he's very popular program. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So there's those things. Then there was some games that were not online that were just opportunities. There was a game called Emperor of the Fading Suns that I worked on. This fairly small, very dedicated, very smart group in Georgia that worked on the game. And the game was maybe half done or 3/4 done. And so the cost to help them finish it and publish it was reasonable. So we did that. That was not online. I mean, you could play versus, but it wasn't like hosted through like, you don't need anything other than the other person. As an aside to that, by the way, tell stories about stuff. So you've heard of the UFC.
Yeah.
So for I think 4 years, I trained under Brian Johnston, who fought in the UFC several times. And so he was fighting in Georgia, and I needed to meet with the developers about the game in Georgia. So I doubled up. I went and I met them, and actually took several of them to the UFC to watch it. And they were shocked because they'd never seen anything like this before in person. I think they were happy that they went. But what's even more funny is because this is like UFC 11 maybe, so it's a much smaller venue, and so they were actually in videos in the background watching not the background, but actually the camera's panning and you see them. So here's these developers working, they're like going, oh, what's going on? So it's kind of a funny tidbit for that. Now some of the stuff I'm just trying to give you some background anecdotes, right? And it's like maybe they're not important to anybody. So game wise, so 2 important games that I worked on, one of which was such a famous failure that it actually is famous, and another one that was a famous success, but that, as you're mentioning, people don't really know about. So I'll talk about the bad one first. So
please.
There's a game called Flesh Feast. Actually, so let's start from the beginning. It was not called Flesh Feast. It was not called that. So very short backstory on me. I love all things zombie. I've seen so many zombie movies. Obviously love the Resident Evil franchise, all that stuff. So there's developers in Norway called InGames, and they were also partially subsidized by Norway. And they sent us a very simple animation of this 3D zombie crawling out of the ground and crawling and walking forward, right? It was pretty simple looking, but the potential was there, and it was a zombie game, and I could potentially work on it. And so I was like, we should do a zombie game, right? Yeah. So this could be a longer story, so I'll make it a little shorter. But essentially, what that grew out was a lot of discussions with the guys, of course, signing them on. One of the biggest problems that I think SegaSoft had was we didn't have a lot of funds. I mean, making a game is expensive, right? And so I still remember it's only $500,000 budget, which is not nearly enough for a super quality game, because it was from scratch too. It wasn't like they had a game almost done. And so we had a limit, and also they were new, the first video game they'd done. Right. And for my part, my failures were that I was split up on several games, and my focus was here and there. And when I gave them design input, I didn't give them deep enough design input, and so the game became what it was. So the essential concept of the game that I worked out with them was think of it like the Dawn of the Dead movie where they're trapped in the mall, right? So that's going to be kind of like the marquee kind of level part of the game. But I want to do that over and over again in different settings. And so the basic story was there's this organization called NASAT, and they have this big island that these weird things are happening on. And so you're sent there to find out. I think I'm a reporter or something. I don't remember. Which is funny because, of course, the Dead Rising game that came, years later. But so essentially, you would control yourself and other characters, and you would try and secure the area of zombies. Sometimes you just try and escape, but then you would basically start gathering a group. Some guys would die, some would live. You pick which guys you're going to use. You'd find weapons and things. Like if you go to the gun shop in the mall, you're going to find guns. Or if you go to the, you can get some fertilizer maybe in the football kind of stadium, whatever, and maybe make a bomb out of it. There's different things you could do, but it was way too scattered. And we tried to be both a real-time strategy where you could control your different guys and also allow you to get in. And so everything was kind of garbage. Because it didn't give enough design input, I think that it didn't have enough kind of like moments of excitement or like tension. It was just kind of like a same-ish kind of thing. Yeah. But it has its charm. And there's actually a retro review of a guy who said, you know what, for all of its problems, I really enjoyed it. And so it's a weird thing where it's almost like a bad movie, right? Like,
it's so bad it's good.
Yeah. And so with that, we did the Tommy Tallarico stuff, right? So I guess probably segue into that a little bit. So Tommy Tallarico was, of course, with Electric Playground for a long time. And I don't know if you've seen his show at all.
I've seen bits, and we've had him on the show before. What a great guy. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, very talented. I
mean, he's brilliant, and he was conversational. I mean, for a guy who's done so much, he definitely has an opinion of himself, but you know what? He has an opinion of you too, and it's a good one. He's a good guy, right? And so he's very like energetic and brilliant and just fun, and it was great. I loved him so much. And so we made 2 videos because he worked with SegaSoft, and that they would do these promos for different games we're doing, right? Yeah. So I was producer on both Flesh Feast, and we'll talk about later, Net Fighter. For Flesh Feast, he and I came up with skits. He does skits for most of them. I don't know if you've seen him. So he does interviews, but he shines with skits. And I love this because and you can find these online. I sent you those links, right? But they're I think it's I want to say season 2 of Electric Playground, but whatever it is, it basically the Flesh Feast one, we're sitting around, it's dark, and we're eating from this bowl of mush. But it's got like this weird kind of light to it, so you can't really see very well. And we're talking about the game. We're showing snippets of the game. I'm telling them how awesome it's going to be, which is a lie. And so at the end of it, by the way, at one point I pick a plastic hand out and I'm sucking on the fingers, and you realize we're supposed to be eating bodies. And then he says something like, he goes, it sounds like a great game, Eric, and this is some great grub. He's all, what is it? And I said, funny you should ask, right? And so then I reach under his shirt, and he starts screaming. I pull out, it looks like a bloody piece of body part, and I put it in my mouth. I tear it off, and then it turns to all bright lights. And so you can see I'm covered in blood, and this what it was is chicken, raw chicken, by the way. Don't ever do it. We didn't get sick, but it was just stupid. Nonetheless, and he falls back, and all the testers who were from SegaSoft came out of their cubes as zombies, like, "Arr." And so it was just such a fun bit. Like, I would do the game again just to be able to do that funny skit from years ago. And so, again, I want to go back on one thing. When I said his opinion of himself, what I meant was he's very confident in his accomplishments, and he should be. So I want to make sure that be very clear. I love the guy. So that was the whole thing of Flesh Feast. And I guess the other thing, I came up with a name for it. It was a movie from the early 70s I had not seen, but because it was so long ago and it was so minuscule that our legal team's like, yeah, we're not worried about it. You can call it Flesh Feast. Our marketing guy, Greg Shemango, he did a great job with this huge, gross poster of like a chainsaw with body parts hanging off it. He sent these arms, these bloody arms, to all the reviewers ahead of time to get them hyped about the game. It was a lot of fun in spite of the end result. So that was Flesh Feast. The other one was Netfighter. There's other minor ones, but those are the three that matter. So Netfighter was one where it made a lot of sense. So we had the online side, which is a very important part of our business. And Mike and I did fighting games. We loved fighting games.
Yeah. And
so a conversation was had, and we said, yeah, you know what? Let's try to do a fighting game on the internet. Now, 1997 or 8 and 98, in 14.4 modems, it was just garbage. Like you could not, because of the fast twitch nature, much more different than something like Quake that has predictable kind of momentum and the reticules and things. Like you can kind of figure things out and it works. Fighting games are like, do you block? Do you time this combo correctly? You know, all that stuff. So the general idea that I believe Mike came up with, which was that we just need to find ways to do predictive behavior for the AI to take over when the packets aren't being sent properly. But then it went even deeper with the engineer and designer, or I was the designer, but designing it, which was have all these very intricate, detailed things that fix a lot of problems. I'll give you one small example because I don't want to go ad nauseum and bore everybody. But so when you would hit a button to attack, there would be a 500 millisecond delay on your side before you see the animation play.
Right.
That gives a half a second for it to get to the other person, and then it plays immediately when it gets to the person, so there's no delay on their side. So now you've already given a buffer. Similarly, when you do a move, the game assumes you're doing the next move in a combo because it has string combos. If you do this, it opens, and so it will start to play the combo on the other side if it hasn't gotten the packet in time. And quite often you are doing the combo, and so it just catches up as appropriate.
Very clever.
And we have a lot of things that are a lot more complicated to explain about if you lose it for 3 seconds or damage is done that wasn't done. But it all worked, and it was a fun game. It was meant to be a lot more, but just like Ristar and just like this Sega CD Eternal Champions, it came out pretty much around the time when SegaSoft was going to go down. And so it had a few players, no opportunities to do a sequel or to elaborate on it. At that point, it was pretty much dead. I'd already moved on to EA at about that point anyway.
Right.
But that was the end of SegaSoft pretty much within a year, I think, after the game came out. So yeah, it's basically SegaSoft. A lot of PC games, no console games, right? And other things trying to make money, like business opportunities. So.
I know it's a bit of a silly question, Eric. These SegaSoft titles, it's all online. There was no physical copies of these games. Is that right? They're you couldn't buy physical copies. Is that right?
So in some cases, yes, because they're online only, right? So think of years later, I worked at a company called Gazillion. They did the Marvel Heroes MMO. If you've ever heard of it. Yep. Great people, great game. I had such a good time. But once the company went under, can't play it. It's done, right? It doesn't exist. And so some games like Netfighter were only for Heat.net, which was part of SegaSoft. And so that and games like 10-6 and these other games that other producers in our department did, they can't be played because they're only there. Now, games like Emperor the Fading Suns, the terribly good, terrible Flesh Feast, you can buy PC games of all those because they're not online only. Yeah.
Do you think there's room for, I don't know, because it's every console's online these days, could they repackage all these games, SegaSoft titles, make it fully online? I just think these sort of games, I'll be honest, I've never really heard of SegaSoft until we started Arcade Attack, really. Right. It went over so many people's heads, and maybe it was ahead of its time. Do you think there's a case that could be brought back?
Yeah, well, so I think you made a good point. It's funny because a lot of things you say are actually cases in point to a lot of things I'm trying to say. So you said, I hadn't heard of SegaSoft. Well, that's not good for a company if people hadn't heard of you and the person's a gamer, right? Now, granted, we were a different demographic. So if you're playing, Saturn and Dreamcast and PlayStation, then you probably weren't playing our games so much because they're PC titles. But that was a problem. Now, so far as packaging these up, in all honesty, I don't think we had a ton of great games. I think that it would just behoove people to do research on them and just buy one of the ones that are out there, because you can. Yeah, it's very easy to play a Windows 95 game on your computer now. And so I don't think it would be fun to be able to get Netfighter running so that people could see it. But again, it's also a game that you really wouldn't want to redo anyway, because it was a game for its time. Yeah. It was a game for its time. It just wouldn't make sense. It's yeah. So I would say no to that. But people can get a lot of these games, and I think that's a good way to kind of relive that.
Absolutely. The SegaSoft story, we could talk hours about it, couldn't we? It's absolutely incredible part of Sega's history, which, again, I don't know too much about, but it sounds just so interesting. Maybe ahead of its time slightly, the whole online gaming side of things. Incredible.
Yeah, I learned a lot. And to be honest, well, so one thing, by the way, I had an assistant producer, David Gray. He actually came from our tech department, and he helped me so much, taught me so much, helped a lot with Netfighter and other games. He actually has been an executive producer at Zynga for, I think, like 10 years or something. So he wanted to do something really big. But I'll make another anecdote about it, though, is that there's some interesting things with Netfighter. I was able to go and use my kind of martial art connections, and we did video reference of all those fighters. That was fun. But what was I getting at? Losing my train of thought. So help me. Where were we talking about?
You talk Netfighter. It's talking about your friend helping make Netfighter. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm having an old man moment. So essentially, Sega and SegaSoft felt a lot different. I stayed with SegaSoft because of Mike Latham. See, another example of why I say nothing but good things about him. But also, I got to work with all my other producing team, and they're all good. Greg Beckstead, Eric Queckenbush, like I was mentioning earlier, Curtis and those guys. We had a great group, but the energy was different because we were a startup and we were struggling, and we had our little moments of success, but it was harder, and it was not Sega anymore. And I loved the Sega time. It was like Disneyland. That's why I always go back to that. It's just like such a magical time. Yeah. And I'm so thankful for that.
Well, can we talk? You kind of half hinted there, but why did you leave Sega? And obviously EA, a huge company, Electronic Arts. How did you get the opportunity to work there? And would you be able to explain that to our listeners, Erik?
Of course, yeah. So it was actually, they had layoffs. So I think it was within about 6 months after the layoffs I think they shut down it completely. And so we had actually an interim executive producer, because at this time Mike Latham was also gone. He left a little bit before me. And this guy, Greg Suarez, he was really cool, and he had worked at EA, and he knew layoffs were coming, and so he called up his buddies over at EA, and they were working on a boxing game. Yep. And they needed a producer, and they say, hey, I got this guy who's worked on fighting games, and he's a kickboxer and blah, blah, blah. And so they happened to be hiring, and I got basically within a week of the layoffs, I was working at EA was Knockout Kings.
Yeah, good game.
Yeah, and so I mean that's, I don't know how much time you want to spend on that stuff, but essentially with Knockout Kings, I was given full lead design duty, which is the first time that I was completely committed to like that, and also as associate producer, so I had both hats kind of, and I worked the internal team, who I would put them right up there with the Sega Interactive. Like, there's the two best internal teams I ever worked with. Nice. In 8 months from scratch, we did Knockout Kings 2000 for PlayStation.
I own that. I had that game. It's very good.
There you go.
Very good.
Yes, and it was such a fun product to work on. As I mentioned, the team was great, and I was giving carte blanche as far as the game content and how it worked, and then I was able to meet all these boxers and all these commentators and stuff, and like so many of them. And then the game came out. It sold I think 800,000 copies and so many good reviews. And then did it again 1 year later with Knockout Kings 2001, which is also for the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. Now, as an anecdote, PlayStation 1, it was recognized in a few of the reviews like, this is the definitive boxing game for the PlayStation. Like, play that one. Yep. PlayStation 2, visually way more impressive, obviously. But the engineer, and I again, not trying to besmirch him, but he did not want to implement the combo system portion of the gameplay for PlayStation 2.
Wow.
So it was a series of single blows as opposed to chaining together a jab cross hook or whatever else. It makes for a much different game, right? And so PlayStation 2 was actually an inferior game, didn't review as well. But I was glad that the internal team for the sequel, we were able to do PlayStation. So I was still very happy with that. And so I guess I should tell you about some of the celebrities because you'd like to hear about that.
I'd love to hear it. Yeah, I love it.
So let's feed Adrian because I'm thankful that you're doing this with me. I want to make you happy. So some of the people you may or may not know. So there's a longtime analyst named Al Bernstein. So he used to do a lot of classic boxing stuff on ESPN. He would talk about, and sweet guy, very gentle. Obviously, he never boxed in his life, but he knew all the stories and stuff. So he and some other people had done some voiceover work for us, right? And so I took him out to lunch. He did not want to talk about boxing. It was obviously a person that has done nothing but talk about boxing with boxing people, if people care about boxing. So he started to ask me, so what movies do you guys like? And so he kept steering it back towards talking about movies, which was fine. And I just thought it was so funny. It's like, yeah, God, the poor guy, he lives boxing, and anyone who meets him wants to talk about boxing, right? You're not going to be like, hey, do you golf, right? People tend to talk about, right, what makes them popular, right? Like you're not asking me questions about Dungeons and Dragons, right? Because you're here about video games. That's important, right? Yeah. So then Teddy Atlas, have you heard of him?
Yeah, how about?
So Teddy Atlas did, I believe it was Sunday Night Fights. I believe he used to commentate, but more importantly, he was a coach at one point for Mike Tyson, and famously, he pulled a gun on Mike Tyson at one point. So Teddy Atlas, not a big guy, big scar on his face from probably some kind of brawl, very New Yorker guy, super nice guy. Now what I mean by that is he's so genuine that if you are nice to him, he will have you over for meals. And in fact, I think he even invited us over. He said, if you guys ever come to, I forget what state he lives in. But he's someone, if you cross him, you're in trouble. That's why he pulled a gun on Mike Tyson, right? Like, you don't do that. And so, well, here's the funny story. So he was doing voiceover work, and the assistant producer I was working with, he had done a lot of the commentating script. And I remember this distinctly. So there was a part where he says, that is supposed to be, that's a picture perfect punch. It's something you call out during the game, right? During the fight. And instead, my assistant producer, who didn't know boxing as well as I did, put, that's a picture punch.
Right.
And so we had a guy who was really in charge of doing the voiceover to making sure the inflections were right, so it flows right. And so he read it, and Teddy Atlas, he's in the booth. He's like, that doesn't make sense. No, just please read it, right? So long story short, now I was there, and I don't know exactly how or why. I think I might have tried to intervene, but for whatever reason, the guy in charge was like, no, I'm doing this, right? And so I was like, well, maybe we just won't use it. I was thinking in the back of my head, we'll just won't use it. So Teddy Atlas was obviously getting more and more agitated in the booth, because here goes a guy he's lived boxing his whole life. He knows boxing inside and out, and he has this dweeby guy telling him to say things that are incorrect, that are not appropriate. And so the guy literally, when he's done, he sensed that hostility. Right. The commentator, the guy working on the sound, he got up and he left quickly. Teddy Atlas comes out and says, where is he? Where's that guy I was talking to? He literally wanted to get in the guy's face, and the guy sensed it, and the guy ran away from him. So it was funny. And then I took him out. We had dinner, and he's kind of a sweet guy. But it's funny because he's a guy you don't want to get on his bad side. Right? Yeah. Now what else?
Can I ask actually, what was the final commentary they got at the end of the game? Did they fix it in the end, or is it literally a picture punch at the end of the game?
We definitely did. Okay, so when I say definitely, it's 20 years ago. I definitely didn't want it in, and I definitely remember saying, let's not put it in. I don't think it got in.
Right, okay.
But you never know. And it might pop in there like very rarely, maybe because I would have been playtesting it and said, hey, why is this in here? So it would have been rare if it's in there. And so then of course, met a lot of the boxers, right? Now there's other commentators and things that I met, right? Sean O'Grady and other people. But Shane Mosley, who was welterweight champion briefly, you may have remembered he fought De La Hoya and stuff. Super nice guy. So these are the things that you like, right? So when you have people that you look up to and you meet them, like, wow, this guy's super nice. He was so nice. And I gave him a tour of EA, and he shot some hoops and stuff when I took him down to our gymnasium area. And I was with him for like an hour and just like talking to me, like just conversation about our families and whatever. And he was still pretty young then. He's like maybe like 25 or something. Yeah. And he was super cool. And a funny story, and this doesn't clown him because I don't know who's behind it. But after he won the championship, we were invited to his celebration in LA. And so we went there, and they had a warehouse and a big, all these signs up and stuff. And up there it said, "Congratulations" with a D. So unfortunately, it's probably someone who doesn't do this for a living that has said it there. I'm like, that's cool. I didn't see that. So then saw Jake LaMotta at a party, but he was at that point already super drunk. But he was, it was just cool just to see him because, I mean, talk about legend, right? Yeah. I mean, and again, I don't know how far you go back for boxing knowledge, but I mean, he fought Sugar Ray Robinson, I think like 7 times or something. Like he was like, obviously Raging Bull movie, right? And then other people. So people I got to talk to were the more recent guys, right? The guys from like 20 years ago or so. Yeah. And the guys that were really nice. So Fernando Vargas, he also was, I think it was like middleweight, also super nice. He's obviously like from a East LA kind of background, but man, he was so respectful and just really nice. And like, again, like, I'm glad you're champion, dude. You're a nice guy, And there's others, but the one, I guess, last one I would mention is Floyd Mayweather.
Right. Wow. So, what a name.
Yeah. So this is before he was super famous. He actually is, what was his record then? I don't remember, but he was up and coming, and obviously we all knew he was going to be something. And so we had done motion capture shoots, and we'd done body scanning and face scanning for a character, right? By the way, it was really cool. I was able to direct the motion capture shoots for the boxing game.
Nice.
Working with these real boxers that I had looked up to was really cool because they know how to do the moves, and I was like, oh, we need a slip left, or we need a hook to the body, and and we coordinated all those things together. But back to my story about Floyd was that we had a bunch of boxers come in, do the body scannings and face scannings, and it was a fair amount of press was there, and we were taking some pictures, and Floyd was the rudest, most self-centered guy you would ever meet. Like he was like, nice. he acted like we were nothing. It was like, even back then he had an ego, and this is the only person in this entire podcast I will speak bad at, partially because, again, I'll go back to Type A, right? So in his defense, the way you become an undefeated superstar mega fight champion is by being that kind of intensive guy.
Yeah.
Often. And so I would equate part of that to just the way he was. But man, I was like, wow, I don't like this guy very much. So, but then again, I was able to meet, unfortunately, I should have looked up before we talked, but there was a famous Irish boxer that did the UK commentating, and I went to the UK and I met him and did the voiceover there. So there's a million, so we spent half an hour trying to figure out his name. But he was also a super nice guy, and I wish I remembered his name because otherwise now it's just me talking about some guy that I met in the UK. But the whole thing was a lot of fun, and I guess I'll truncate the rest because this is more retro game stuff, right? Is that I had then got a little bit too big for my britches, when I thought I should be promoted and got all this stuff for all the work I'd done and success. So I left and I worked for THQ and company. Didn't go so well. They didn't have a producer there, which is a big red flag because they don't want producers if you come in. And so then I went back to my old boss from EA, who was working at a mobile game company. Later became Glue. You heard of Glue?
Yeah, that does
So
ring a
Glue has like the Kardashian game. They're very successful. It was not called Glue back then, but they're at the very beginning when there's like maybe like 10 people. But then opportunity came to go back to EA, which I jumped at. They also had things that Glue weren't perfect anyway, but EA is like, I loved EA, and I worked on casual games for 9 years. Wow. Working on Pogo games, Pogo.com, casual games. Great. Like I would say the top 3 experiences I had was probably EA, Sega, and Gazillion. And EA the second time was probably even better because I had so many good people that I worked with for so many years, and was able to do. I was the sole designer on about a dozen games, and I worked with small teams. It was a great environment. People really upbeat. Loved it there. Later on, I went on and worked at Bandai Namco for 2.5 years in the mobile division. Worked, as I've mentioned a few times, at Gazillion and Marvel Heroes. As a big comic book guy, it was a dream. They only lasted about 2 years after I was there. And then I was at Cryptic briefly for about a year. Right. And then more recently, I took a break because my new baby was born. Because I also had that kickboxing gym, right? Impact, these guys here. And so I had income, so it was okay. But then more recently, an interesting tie into Sega. I should go back to Gazillion. At Gazillion, I work with 2 Sega people. So
2 legends, yeah.
2 legends, absolute legends. So one was a guy I knew pretty conversationally, was Ed Annunziata. He was a producer for, of course, Echo the Dolphin. I believe you're going to be talking to him at some point as well.
Yeah. Hopefully in the next few weeks, or at least the next month or so. Yeah, we're going to get him on, hopefully.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just him and Latham, like they did so many things for Sega, right? They did a lot of great things. And so I worked with him briefly on helping him design a Star Trek game, Star Trek Discovery, that never happened because the company shut down. And then also, though, I don't want to say more importantly, but as a big wow, the chairman of the board, about 10 feet from where I was sitting, was Tom Kalinske, CEO of Sega. Yeah. I found out later he had been out of the industry pretty much since Sega. And so then here it is my first memories of him were Sega. And since then he hadn't worked in the video game industry, comes back. He didn't remember me, of course. Again, I was a boots on the ground guy making games, but I reminisced with him. And again, what a sweet man. Oh my God. I mean, he's such a cool guy. If you watched interviews with him, he's a very nice, kind person. And I was telling him about, that's just great memories that I just told you about with the Sega commercials and the all hands meetings and stuff. So it was cool to work with them.
Full circle.
Yeah, it's great. So it was just so cool to see him again. And then the reason I jumped back was because more recently, about 6 months ago, a former intern from Sega, Seth Gerson, he came in and I got to know him. We worked on like one game with me, and he contacted me. He said, "Hey, I'm CEO of this video game company, and we normally do VR games, but now we're going to do a console game. Can you come in as a game design consultant on this boxing game we're doing?" And so for the last 6 months, I've been working with a very talented, really good team it's called Creed Champions Big Rumble Boxing. And
Creed.
So it's the Creed license. It has all of the Rocky characters, and you have you can play Clubber, you can play Drago, all the guys in the recent movies. The game looks great. We're working on I think a first day patch after the break.
Is that the VR one, or is that?
No, it's not. So they do have a Creed VR game.
That's one I've heard of. Yeah.
Yep, and that's also a good game. It's a completely different game. So the reason they brought me on was because this is a flat screen fighter. This is you either play the AI, which is more likely nowadays with COVID, right? But you can play 2-player, and so the idea is taking their license and exercising it in a way that somebody that might want to play a boxing game, granted a very casual, fun boxing game. It breaks a lot of rules. It's just a fun, crazy game. But once you understand what it is, you'll enjoy it. It's its own thing. It's a different experience.
Eric, I've got to stop there. I'm the biggest Rocky fan ever. I'm a huge fan of Rocky. I could talk about it all day. Are you a fan as well? I know.
Oh yeah, of course. So of course I've seen them all.
Yeah.
And some of them more times than a few. I think my very favorite was probably 3.
Oh, I love that one.
Because I mean, Clubber Lang was just such a hurricane, from his acting to his look to the way that they personified him in the ring. He was just a beast, and it was just so fun. Yeah, but I watched them all, and then everybody loves that story, right? The underdog story, getting back up, and I think especially if you look at like Balboa, right? You remember Balboa, right? I mean, he's really at Creed. He's taken it to such a mature level.
Yes.
To because I mean, geez, the first four or 5 movies were extremely well. Actually, the first movie wasn't, but they started getting really campy.
It did get a little bit 80s, didn't it? Let's be honest.
Yeah. But for their time, that's what it needed to be. And it was just great. Like, Ivan Drago just glistening with whatever they greased him up with and stuff. And all those lines, right? I mean, oh my God. So I was excited to work on it, but I don't want to misrepresent, especially for you who might play it now. The characters are there, and it's a very fun game. And you'll see some things that are like, oh, that kind of feels a little bit like Clubber Lang, or Ivan Drago, or whoever else. But it's its own game. It's a fun beat 'em up, but it's well done.
Is it out yet? Sorry, are you working on it still?
Yeah, so we're doing a first day patch. I believe it's like the end of this month, and then I think it comes out, let's say, April, March.
It's nice.
Yeah,
is it on consoles and PC? Can you reveal that, or is it still?
So they've announced. I checked. Otherwise, we'd not be talking about this.
Right.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Like NDA, they'd like shoot me in the head instead of paying me, right? So they had announced it, and so it's gonna be on PC, Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation.
Oh, I'm getting it.
I'm 99.9% sure it's all those 4. Yes.
Oh.
And feel free to contact me and give you tips as well. It's cool. Games are very interesting beasts, right? So a lot of games I will design from the start, and I'll try and think of all the permutations ahead of time, so that when the unknown comes, you're more prepared. You have a very solid foundation. Other games are a lot different nowadays. They're more iterative. They have a basic concept, and they just keep iterating, and then the developers don't know until the end what's going to be. This one is a little bit of the second one. And so what it ended up being was this really cool, fun game that's very approachable for casual players. Good. But doesn't try to be a hardcore boxing game like Knockout Kings. Does not try to be the quintessential Rocky homage, because it assumes a lot of people don't know Rocky aside from the look. So, but you're still playing them. One thing you might enjoy is that they have a story mode for all the main characters and some other new made characters. And the story mode, it's this really fun parody of the world. And so you'll have characters that never fought each other or would not intersect. Creed could fight Ivan Drago, for example, not his son. But they worked this out in a storyline way, and because it's so nonsensical, it's sometimes like a dream kind of sequence or something crazy. Nice. There's this great moment. I told the developers when I was reading. So there's this great moment where between fights, something happens, and I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, but nobody here's played it yet, so nobody can call me on it. Is that essentially there's one part where they talk about I think it's Creed is about to fight Ivan Drago, right. And no, Creed's about to fight somebody, and they're talking about Ivan Drago, and then I said, oh yeah, I know my father killed your dad, and then Ivan Drago comes in, he goes, yeah, sorry about that, right? And so like obviously they wouldn't do stuff like that, and then okay, I remember what it was now. So this was with now I'm going to lose all your listeners here because I'm going off too much of a tangent. Essentially, it involved Apollo Creed, who was already dead.
Yes. And
they brought him back. And so he said, yeah, I had to pull 3 strings, but I'm back. I can make the fight.
Love it.
Right. So it related to all the conversation about, sorry, I killed your dad. But then he's like, no, I'm back. I can fight. I had to pull some strings. Like, what strings did you pull? The devil, right? So that's what I mean, right? So you will enjoy it, and that you'll get the jokes.
Yeah,
yeah. He's dead. But it's certainly not Rocky. It's its own parody. So hopefully I didn't just lose all your listeners with that
No,
last.
well, look, I'm guilty of always swinging it back to the Rocky talk anyway. So half our listeners are like, oh, it's typical Adrian.
I know.
Bring a crowbar and Rocky in somehow. Before we move on, somehow, if you can, try and get the Rocky 4 robot in there as a playable character, Eric. That's my dream. That is my dream.
Yeah, I wish you would have brought it up. So I will tell the team. I'll give you a spoiler. He's not in there. But because they're so far along, they might do expansions. So I will bring that up. I will bring that up to the CEO. So if it's going to happen, I'll send you a message and let you know.
I'm getting that.
I forgot about the robot.
A lot of people try to, I think, sometimes, to be fair.
Yeah.
Before we finish, got some quick fire social media questions because I chucked on Facebook and Twitter that I'm going to interview. Is that all right? And some of the stuff you kind of mentioned already, to be fair, but we can quickly go over it. So the first person is Jump Cancel, who is another podcast who covers gaming, and he says Ristar came so late in the Mega Drive's lifespan, even after Sega Saturn was released. Was development a little more relaxed for the older system, or was it the usual deadline rush? Now you kind of answered that, but was it still a rush to get Ristar finished, or was it a bit more sort of chilled out?
Well, yeah. So, granted, this is a Sega of Japan game, so probably the rush came in Japan because we get it at a point when it's pretty well done, or at least done enough that we can go through test plans and stuff, right? I'm assuming this is my assumptions because the system was already kind of dying. They probably wanted it out as soon as possible. We always had marketing tied into stuff. And so a lot of times marketing would just dictate, release it by this date. And so they would already have that lined up, and for better, for worse, they would make most of the dates. So yeah, for that part, we already talked about the first part, right? Which is, yes, he's right. And it was trying to be like a Donkey Kong and try and get a little more life into Sega Genesis. But it was a good game, but I don't think it did that.
So another one of our really loyal listeners, Todd, he says, ask him why the Hakuna Matata log waterfall level was so hard in Lion King.
So I think I did some testing on that. Either that or I just played it because I remember it's brutal because, as you know, maybe you do know.
It's a tough game. Yeah,
it's like famously difficult, right? Because you're going up, and then if you don't make a jump, then you're going down again. As you could literally be playing that thing for an hour, that one part. So that of course had nothing to do with anything I did, and I don't know anybody that worked on it. I will say this. So, and as a retro guy, a lot of games were made to be a challenge to the players, right? So a big change that happened sometime in the early 2000s was that games were made to be finished and enjoyable and retriable, not games you just can't beat. It used to be back in the 90s, you would say, hey, did you ever beat that game? I beat it on hard mode. Oh my God, dude, you're badass, right? So I think it was still part of that mindset. Now, why they would do it for a game that I could see a lot of kids playing, I don't know. Because, I could see a 6-year-old playing that game and like crying, So yeah, it's famously hard. I do remember that part.
Good platform, although, to be fair. But yeah, that level, that's killer.
Yeah.
Michael Latham, friend of the show and friend. Yes. There you go. He chips in. He's already asked before. He says, ask him why you're so good looking. It's very annoying. And also he says, beyond Eternal Champions, I would ask Eric what game in his long career he thinks defines him. And he goes on in brackets, Eternal Champions Dark Side on the Sega CD doesn't exist without him. So big praise there for Michael.
Right. Well, if I could ever claim I was handsome, that ended long ago. So thank you for that comment, Mike. But so far as games, so I think I kind of mentioned it, but maybe not specifically. So Eternal Champions CD was my best experience so far as we're doing it, we did it, we shipped it. I love this game. I love the team. It's a magical time at Sega. My proudest achievement would be Knockout Kings 2001 for the reason I mentioned earlier, was just because I was lead designer. I was also producer, so I had both hats. I enjoyed the team. We had success. EA really supports their teams really well. You don't have to, kind of scrimp and try and figure things out. You have people to help you. So it'd probably be that.
Good answer. He also asked him about his love of D&D and why he's a secret geek. But we haven't got loads of time to talk about D&D. But
I don't want to kill you with that. I can make it really short.
Yeah. No, it's something I want to play. A lot of my friends play it, so this could be an opportunity.
Well, so this I'm not even going to talk about D&D in any length at all. So something I love to tell people is that back when I was, did I say 13? I like comic books, video games, Dungeons and Dragons, and martial arts. All of those things back when I was 13 were not things that you would tell people about. You would not tell people you play video games, like dork, play video games, grow up, you know. Well, actually, I'll go a little farther. I'll say 16, because then 13-year-old, you do whatever you want. When you get older, you're like, why aren't you hanging out with people and doing like playing sports or whatever, right? Martial arts back when I was younger, there's no UFC yet. People made fun of you like Karate Kid or something like that. Comic books, you would hide them inside of your trapper keeper at school, not people know you read comic books once you got older. And D&D was the biggest taboo of all. Like you would not, like, your D&D friends would not talk about D&D in public because it was just such a nerdy thing. So what's cool about all that is all those things are very popular now. All of them. I mean, just MCU movies, right? I worked on that MMO for Marvel. UFC's huge. I have a kickboxing gym that people go to work out. D&D is, of course, huge. They have biggest probably amount of players ever at this point right now. And video games, you have to say anything else about video games. So it's just funny how all of the things that made me a complete dork and loser are things that are now the coolest ever. So that's what I'll say about that.
Be proud, Erik and Co. Yeah, I agree. We're all big geeks in Arcade Attack, and we're proud of it. You know, nothing to be ashamed of. The Segaholic says, did he have any input into the Saturn port of Virtua Fighter? And if so, what challenges did he and his team face in bringing the title home? I assume from the arcades.
Right. So again, I think and I've said it a few times now, you already know, most SOJ titles, the producers shouldn't take a whole lot of credit for it. Except for the 3/4 of the script that I did for Blazing Heroes, really not much else. And I may have been credited somehow with that, but if anything, it's helped with test.
Oh, fair enough. Sega Universe asks, what does he think, or Erik, what do you think of Sega's many great IPs, and which of these games do you think could translate well into modern releases? And why do you think we've seen quite a lack of it recently for Sega releasing their IPs?
Yeah, I mean, those are all good questions, and I don't know what's going on with the company Sega nowadays. Again, I think that there's still a lot of potential with the people like you who are still of an age where you're very active in video games and have the nostalgia to bring those back in different ways with, they wouldn't need to do a Kickstarter, maybe they should, to then hedge their bets or hedge their hogs, get it? So, but I think as to which games, I think, Sonic's been done over and over again, right?
Yeah.
But I would say this, and I don't have any design ideas on that. Like, I certainly have not been thinking about it, but the intense speed and the thrill and the putting together of motion and getting rings and having moments where you just lost them all or whatever, all those things, that excitement level and that energy that you have in the Genesis isn't really done in games right now. Like, there's games that are fast in parts and things, but you might think of like some of the power drift games like that are really crazy crash 'em up games, but I would think something like a Sonic, if it's done right, and I know it's been a lot, but that could be good. All the virtual stuff, those are interesting because those are a game of their time. They're like, wow, it's a 3D game, right? Yeah. So, but I think that if you reskin it, and again, they've been reskinned. I mean, Virtua Fighter, how many versions they had of Virtua Fighter? I think they could do things with that and take it to another level, not just try and reskin it and add characters. And yeah, and maybe you could do something cool, like some kind of strange game where combines several of them somehow. Again, I don't have any ideas, but I think yes, I think that the nostalgia and the content is there, and I think that it could be good.
Good stuff. I've got two. So Lowell Mohammed and Adam K. They asked the same question. Do you have a favorite character from the Virtua Fighter series, and why?
Easily Kage.
Okay.
Kage Maru. So the guy's a freaking ninja, right? I mean, who doesn't want to be a ninja, especially back when it first came out? He's got that cool kind of dragon tail sweep where he knocks the person off their feet. He has that kind of aerial backflip kick, which is like Bruce Lee did in Enter the Dragon. And you do those when you pull them off back then, because the game, definitely not a simulation, but it felt a lot like a simulation the way it played. And so when you pull it off, it's like pulling off the move in a real fight. You're like, wow, I got you, you know? So yeah, he's definitely the coolest to me. I did like, Jesus Christ, was it Wolf, right? The wrestler?
Oh, yeah.
I liked him as well. But Kage for sure.
And Oscar, we spoke about Oscar earlier. He's chipped in because he's listened to the Michael Latham podcast in the past. I think you've answered this already, to be fair, but he asked, please talk about a good story about Flesh Feast, the best zombie game in history. Ha ha! I think a little tongue in cheek there. But yeah, you kind of mentioned that already, but giving Oscar a bit of a shout there. But Flesh Feast, what a great story! I mean, yeah. Could there be a sequel? You never know.
Yeah, I know. It was a game that the ambitions were there. I would say that, and one more comment about that is the things that I've learned from that and since then, I think I could have helped make a much, much better game. You know,
really?
Oh yeah, I mean, it would have pared it down. So, whoa, wait, we can't do all this. Like, we don't have the time. We can't make sure that this type, you can't play real-time strategy plus control your character in different modes. We need to figure out a way to make it look the best it can, because the graphics were also not good. That initial graphic I told you about when the guy comes up, it pretty much looked like that at ship. It wasn't like it really got better. Okay. And so basically making the design smaller, focusing on the most important parts, and then it probably would have been more like a Dead Rising, where it'd be like you'd be a character as opposed to like having a cast of characters. Yeah, I mean, I learned my lesson. It's just funny how this game, it still like lingers. I've released about 50 games if you count all the mobile games I worked on.
Right.
And that's the one that always comes up. What about Flesh Feast?
The infamous Flesh Feast, yeah. The final question from our social media was Dudley Ode Yesterzine. What a lovely name. And this, I'd love to know this actually. Is it true that you guys or Sega found out that Sonic Spinball had music they couldn't use at the very last minute? Is there any truth in that?
So I don't know if I remember this from being an assistant producer or just being there, but I remember that this happened. Wow. I don't know anything else. Like I didn't get any emails or I wasn't in any meetings, but I do remember that they had to pull it off the shelf and put in a new one with proper music. But
you don't know the reason why it was pulled?
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I could look it up, and then it'd be like doing the same thing you guys are doing. So I don't know anything, but I just remember that. Yeah.
I mean, it must have been quite costly then, I assume. I've got two final questions there. It's been a great chat. Really enjoyed this. But my penultimate question is, and you kind of spoke about the projects you're working on at the moment, but was there any games you've worked on that were never released in the past that you will think, and you kind of look back and go, this would have been a good game? Yeah.
So, I've had the fortune of having the vast majority of games I've worked on get released. Yeah. And I've had friends in the industry who've worked 2 or 3 years on a single title that then they got killed. And not only is that completely disheartening, but also is terrible for your career, because what's your resume? Oh, I worked on a game that never released for the last 2 years, right? Yeah. So it makes your life harder. And so I feel for all those guys a lot. They're the only one. So there's a few at Bandai Namco because we had a shift in leadership. But these were all pretty much in concept stages. So, I mean, that's like anything. But I'd written an entire treatment for Jagged Alliance for the mobile. Are you familiar with that game?
Yeah. Is it a shooting game or?
So it is a turn-based strategy game where you manage a squad of mercenaries on this island. You also kind of do a resource management, can kind of control parts of the island. And famously, it has some really crazy characters that will do things on their own. So you could hire a guy for cheap, but by the way, he's also wanted for murder, and he might actually knife one of your players if he decides he's mad of your characters. So so I wrote a whole treatment for that, but that got canceled. And then the only other one was, as I told you, that Gazillion got shut down. Yeah. And I was working on, so I'd done the Doctor Strange adventure tying with the movie, and that was a joy, and it was well received and whatever. Then I was working on one for Thor Ragnarok.
Right.
And, wow. Yeah. So I'd done the entire. So the difference in some of the later stages of my design career was that I worked with tools. I actually implemented this stuff as opposed to having a paper design and giving direction. I was actually in there doing this stuff. And so I was able to put together a whole sequence of things. And you've seen the movie?
Yeah.
Okay. So very similar storyline, but we actually didn't know the full story back then. Marvel doesn't give it to you. It's very, very, very cloak and dagger kind of thing. So I had a similar story though. And so at the end, you end up defeating Hela and you team up with the three. Remember his three guys, right? And then also Lady Sif. And then when you're done and you get your loot, because it plays like Diablo. I don't know if you ever know the game. It plays a lot like Diablo. You get your loot, the game's over, and then before you exit that adventure, you can actually go around and talk to the NPCs, right? And so I had implemented a part where you could talk to each one of them, and they were talking character. Like the big fat guy Heimdall would talk about, oh, I want to get something to eat, or I want to get hamburgers, or whatever. But the reason I go to this long story setup, which was that you're talking to one of them, and he says, oh, she wanted to be Hela, Queen of the Nine Realms, but instead she's hella disappointed.
Very good.
So I was unable to put that into a game because what happened was I did my work, and then all the people that were going to put in the art and all these other things, they were not allowed to actually complete it. But you know what? That's fine. I mean, I consider myself incredibly blessed for all the stuff I've been able to do. So that's totally fine.
It's a hella shame it didn't get released.
Thank you.
Eric, really great chat, and thank you. We've got one final question, but it's been such an honor, and it's been such, I love to hearing the stories, and Sega and EA, to be fair, and we the way EA has gone recently, we're a little bit. I feel the microtransactions, but they still hold a big part.
This is old EA when they weren't as bad.
But you weren't working there when Trip was there, is that right? Trip would have left by then. Trip Hawkins.
He had already had Digital Chocolate at that point. His mobile game company. Yeah, so I never did meet Trip.
Yeah, another legend. But my final question, because I ask all the guests this: if you could share a few drinks with any video game character, who would you choose and why?
Wow. So I think it would definitely be a different answer every decade you would have asked me, right? Like it would be different. The games that stick with me nowadays are adventure games, right? Yes. Because they have evolving stories and characters, and the characters go through things. It's like watching a movie, right? But you're that character, or you're watching or controlling this character. So this will be a really obtuse one, but I'll tell you why. So Lee Everett, do you know what that is?
No.
So Lee Everett was a protagonist in the Telltale games Walking Dead first season.
I've heard of them, haven't played them.
Okay, so can I give you a spoiler?
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
Go for it.
So anybody who want to play the game, you might want to mute me in a second. But basically, the guy has a path of redemption throughout the whole thing, and he somehow is being accused of murder. He may or may not have done, and he's kind of a gloomy character. And then he meets this little girl, Clementine, who's by herself, and so he basically does everything he can to keep her alive and goes through the stories of interacting with other characters. And at the very end, after playing for a long time, it's a long game, and get to the end of it, he gets bit. And he had developed this very fatherly relationship with Clementine, the little girl, over all this time. And it's a point where he chains himself to this pipe and says, just go, right? And then you're now playing Clementine, and you have a choice. You have your gun. You can either shoot him so he doesn't turn into a zombie, or you can just leave and so you don't have to go through killing him, right? And so my younger daughter, so I have two daughters, right? I have one who's 2 now and one who's 19. And my younger daughter, who then was like 14 or 13 at that time, she was watching the whole thing with me. And got to the end, and I pulled the trigger because I was thinking it's horrible to let him turn zombie. And I shit you not, I cried. I cried for the first time in a video game. And so aside from bringing him back to life, the reason I wanted to talk to Lee was I would just want to know about what was his past life, and you did such a good thing. You kept Clementine alive, and you're my hero, So it's like he's a real person, and so I would just want to connect with him and understand him and tell him that his life mattered and stuff, because it was such a sad story. See, I'm getting, you can tell I'm getting emotional now.
Yeah, nice.
This guy is trying to redeem himself and trying to muddle through the land of the Walking Dead with this little girl, and he does everything he can. At the very end, he gets bit, right? And so it was just such a great character, and I would love to just talk to him, to just connect with him.
Were you a bit annoyed by the ending, or do you think it was a very clever ending? Because it does sound quite intense.
So they have several seasons of that, right? And I played, I think, the first 3, and they're all great. And so, you know, The Walking Dead is famously heartbreaking.
I've seen this. I've seen the first 2 or 3 series. Yeah.
Are you talking about? No, so we're talking about 2 different things now. So, are we talking about the game or?
No, yeah, the game. The game itself.
Okay. Yeah. So, the game, I think, it wanted to make Clementine the protagonist, and so Lee did have to somehow be extricated from the story at some point. And I don't mind it. So, as a player, I want to hurt a little bit because I get motivated, right? Like, I still remember playing Max Payne.
Oh, I love that game.
And at the very beginning, there's this dream sequence where his baby and his wife get murdered. And I got I was in the zone. I was like, I'm going to get revenge. You know, like I was Max Payne at that point. And because I was upset that this had happened, right? And so it motivated me. And then when I played subsequent games with Clementine, because the game of making decisions, I wanted to make sure that she had the right people around her, that she did the things that she thought were right, things that would keep her alive. And so I was super invested in that character, as opposed to Streets of Rage, right? It's a much different experience, you know. So I didn't play the last season of The Walking Dead Telltale. I know that Telltale, of course, they went under, as you know. But somebody picked it up and finished it. And so I'm interested to finish it. But I loved season 2, and I think I finished season 3. I don't remember, but I enjoyed them. Yeah.
I played their Monkey Island ones. I do respect them. I love adventure games as well, Eric. I think they're brilliant. They mean so much to me as well, like the classic LucasArts games. I can talk about them all day. Well, look, we'll leave it there, Eric. It's been such a great chat, and I really appreciate the stories. It's been really honest and really interesting, and I do appreciate the support behind the scenes as well. You've been really good. Our listeners might not know this, but you've been really good giving feedback and chipping in, and it means a lot. So thank you.
Of course, yeah. No, and again, you know what? Everybody here needs to know, if they don't know by listening to you. You guys are doing a huge service for the retro people, right? Because you're keeping the games alive, the conversations alive, and also these interviews. Now, granted, you're interviewing us now, but in 20, 30 years from now, like a lot of us will be gone. And so you have interviews with these people talking about that era. Like, you think about interviews with people who worked on Star Wars back in the 70s, right? Now, granted, I didn't work on Star Wars, but you know what I'm saying, right? So you guys do something amazing. So thank you. And I'm honored, again, as I'd said before our podcast here, was that if I didn't have all the people around me, the artists, the engineers, all the talent, the QA people, I would just be a guy with ideas, right? And so I'm honored to be able to speak, hopefully, to those games and their efforts as well. Not so much like what I did, right? Just that I was a part of that ride. So thank you for letting me share.
Oh, bless you. No, it's a very nice way of finishing the interview. Eric, thank you. And hopefully we'll get you back in the future, you know?
All right, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anytime, buddy.